Daughter always loved telling the truth. When I asked her if she thought I was pretty, she looked right at me and said, "Honestly, Mom, you are the ugliest mom in my whole preschool." When my mother-in-law pointed her finger in my face and called me a wasteful spender for buying her an expensive backpack, I asked my daughter how that made her feel. She smiled and said, "Honestly, I was pretty happy watching you get yelled at." My husband once joked with her, asking if she would take care of me when I got old. She scoffed, "I am not taking care of her when she gets old. She should just hurry up and be put 6 feet under." My heart went completely cold, but her eyes curved into happy little crescents. I am just telling the truth. Later on, a detective came to our house, doing a routine neighborhood canvass, and asked my daughter a few standard questions. Once again, my daughter told the truth. But this time it was a truth she would regret for the rest of her life. A detective knocked on our door to update the local residential registry. My 7-year-old daughter Brenda blinked her big eyes and asked, "Why do you have to write our names down?" The detective gently patted her head. "It helps keep the neighborhood safe, and it helps us make sure bad people do not kidnap little kids." Brenda nodded, her face suddenly lighting up with an exaggerated look of realization. "Oh, I get it. You want to catch kidnappers? Well, isn't my mom one of those? She told me out of her own mouth yesterday that she kidnapped me." The smile froze completely on the detective's face. I stared at my daughter in absolute shock. Seeing the sly, calculating gleam in her eyes, my brain started to buzz. Brenda had a habit of saying honest things, specifically designed to humiliate me and cause me pain. Just yesterday, I refused to let her eat too much junk food before dinner. She threw a fit, calling me an evil mother, and screaming that she didn't want to be my daughter anymore. I was exhausted and furious, so I snapped back, "You're right. You aren't my daughter. I kidnapped you." At the time, she argued back, saying she didn't believe me. I never imagined she would take a sarcastic comment. She didn't even believe, package it as the truth and feed it directly to a police officer. The detective was already looking at me with a completely different expression. I forced out a dry, awkward laugh. He was misbehaving yesterday, and I lost my temper. It was just a stupid joke. I didn't think she would take it literally. The detective's brow relaxed slightly. He turned to Brenda. "Little girl, you can't joke about things like that. If your mom gets mistaken for a kidnapper, she could go to jail." Seeing Brenda nod, the knot in my chest finally loosened. I thought the ordeal was over. But a second later, Brenda looked up with an expression of pure innocent sincerity. "But my mom can't have babies. If I wasn't kidnapped, where did I come from?" The scrutiny and suspicion instantly returned to the detective's eyes. I panicked and quickly tried to explain. "I had an IUD put in right after she was born." When kids hear about birth control, they misunderstand what "can't have babies" means. I tugged on Brenda's sleeve, silently begging her to stop talking. She refused to listen. "Mom couldn't have babies right after she got married. But I am already 7 years old." I had no idea how a 7-year-old girl possessed the mental capacity to connect those dots. But when you thought about what she was implying, it was impossible not to jump to horrible conclusions. My husband and I had been married for 6 years. I had an IUD for those exact 6 years. So how could we possibly have a 7-year-old daughter? The detective clearly did the math in his head. His expression turned dead serious. "Ma'am, I am going to need to see the child's birth certificate." My stomach dropped to the floor. There was no birth certificate for Brenda in this house 6 years ago. I had literally fought off human traffickers to rip this child out of their hands. When the police eventually pulled the files on her biological parents, the reality left everyone speechless. My husband and I had looked at each other with pale faces, sharing the exact same thought. If we sent this poor baby back to her biological family, living with them would be a fate worse than death. Simply couldn't bear it. So we went through the system, adopted her, and raised her. To this day, Brenda probably thought my angry comment yesterday was just a cruel joke. But she had no idea that the joke was actually the truth. The only reason we never told her was that we didn't want her to feel like an outsider in her own home. But now, if I didn't confess, this detective might actually put me in handcuffs. Just as I opened my mouth to explain the adoption, Brenda suddenly shrieked in mock excitement. "Oh, I remember now. Mom got pregnant out of wedlock. She had me before she got married." When the grown UPS talk about women being loose, this is what they mean, right? I stood frozen in place. If things were really the way she was describing them, I would have wanted the floor to open up and swallow me out of shame. But my silence in that moment wasn't born of embarrassment. It was born of a chilling, profound heartbreak, thinking she had successfully pierced my armor. The corners of Brenda's mouth curled up into a thrilled little smirk. Mom, I am just telling the truth to help clear your name. You shouldn't be mad at me. The detective withdrew his intense gaze from me, shaking his head slightly, as he finished writing down our information in a corner, where no one could see. My hands were curled into fists, my fingernails biting into my palms, as I desperately pushed down the surge of bitter emotion. This was not the first time she had done something like this. Back when she was in preschool, she constantly praised other mothers in front of me, talking about how gorgeous they were. I asked her, "Do you think Mom isn't pretty?" Brenda stared dead into my eyes and said, "Mom, you are not pretty at all. You are the ugliest mom at the whole preschool." I was stunned seeing her eyes curved into happy little slits, clearly enjoying the moment. I couldn't help but speak up. "When you say things like that, it really hurts Mom's feelings." To my surprise, she crossed her arms and put on a self-righteous face. "But my teacher said, good kids always tell the truth." I was left completely speechless. A strange, uneasy feeling took root in my chest. Logically speaking, young children usually have a natural, loving bias toward the people who raise them, especially regarding their looks. But Brenda was different. Later, when she started elementary school, I spent $100 buying her a shiny, branded frozen backpack she had been begging for. When my mother-in-law found out how much it cost, she marched over, pointed her finger right at my nose, and screamed at me for wasting Chris's hard-earned money. Brenda completely ignored the vicious scolding I was receiving. She treated the yelling as background music, while she spun around the living room, dancing with her new bag. Later, I couldn't help but ask her, "When you heard Grandma yelling at me, did you have any thoughts about it?" Brenda rolled her eyes around for a second, before locking them tightly onto mine. "Yeah, I thought it was super fun." Seeing the genuine radiant smile on her face, my expression completely froze. She stared at me for a long time, drinking in my reaction before adding her favorite line, "Don't be mad, Mom. I am just telling the truth. Just last month, Brenda caught a terrible flu. I didn't sleep for weeks, staying by her bedside day and night to nurse her back to health. When my husband Chris saw that I had lost 10 pounds from the stress, his heart broke. He asked Brenda, "Mom is working so hard to raise you. Are you going to take care of her when she gets old?" Brenda glanced at me, pouted her lips, and said, "No way. When Mom gets old, she needs to hurry up and go into the ground." Chris stiffened in shock. Every ounce of color drained from my face. Yet seeing our devastated reactions, Brenda actually started clapping and cheering, thrilled by the misery she had caused. I remained completely silent for the rest of the day. Brenda even had the nerve to ask me, "Mom, are you upset again, just because I told the truth that night?" I didn't close my eyes for a single second. Chris tossed and turned beside me, breaking the heavy silence. He suddenly whispered, "Whenever she says those things, she has to just be joking, right?" Even his voice trembled with uncertainty. Every single time her words tore me to pieces, a brief flash of malicious joy would appear in her eyes, and she would deploy her favorite excuse, using telling the truth to silence any complaints I had. Remembering all of this, my emotions were reaching a boiling point. I rushed to the door, eager to see the detective out and be done with this nightmare. "Mr. Detective," Brenda yelled out just as he stepped over the threshold, "if I find out my mom really is a kidnapper, can I call you to arrest her?" The detective gave Brenda a highly complicated look, then glanced back at me.
Oh,
Ultimately, he slipped a business card into Brenda's hand before walking away. After the detective left, Brenda tilted her head and studied my face. Seeing that I wasn't breaking down or yelling, a flash of deep disappointment crossed her eyes. I couldn't hold it back anymore. "Why did you say those things to the officer?" Brenda put her hands on her hips, lifting her chin with total arrogance. "Because I am a good kid who tells the truth. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself. You're the one who got mad and said I was kidnapped. That confirmed it." She purposely fed that story to the police, just to punish me for the angry comment I made yesterday. I tightened my fists and asked her one more question. "If Mom really did steal you from human traffickers, but your real parents were terrible people, and I kept you to protect you, would you still call the police and send me to prison?" Brenda nodded without a single second of hesitation. "Of course I would.
Mom.
I told you I am a good kid who tells the truth." My heart plunged straight into an icy abyss. Chris had come home from work quietly and had been standing in the hallway for a while. His face was terrifyingly dark. Still, he suppressed his anger, walked over, and patted my shoulder to comfort me. Maybe she will grow out of it when she gets older." Seeing Chris upset made Brenda happy again. She completely ignored our pain. I couldn't stop the thought from echoing in my head. If Chris and I spent half our lives pouring our blood, sweat and tears into raising a vicious, ungrateful parasite. Why shouldn't we cut our losses right now? But we had raised her for so many years. I wanted to give her one absolute final chance. I looked at the detective's business card sitting on the table and spoke deliberately. Brenda, you really were kidnapped. Inside the safe in our bedroom, there is a file containing all your original records. It has the names of your biological parents on it. If you keep using your truths to intentionally break our hearts, your dad and I are going to pack your bags and send you back to your real family. Hearing my tone, the smugness vanished from her young face, replaced by a genuine age-appropriate fear. She turned to Chris in a panic. Dad, is she telling the truth? Chris swallowed his disgust and sighed. Your mom is just messing with you. The panic slowly faded from Brenda's face. She puffed out her cheeks and glared at me. So it was a lie. I wish I actually had different parents. I hate you, Mom. Chris's expression darkened even further, but her entire focus was locked onto me. I played along, forcing a deeply wounded, heartbroken expression onto my face. Only then did her lips part into a satisfied, cruel smile. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Brenda truly believed she was our biological flesh and blood. Because she thought that bond was insoluble, she felt completely bold to hurt me without any fear of consequences. Any remaining warmth in my heart completely froze over. Late that night, as I hovered on the edge of sleep, I heard the subtle click of the bedroom door handle turning. Tiny shadow slipped into the room. A minute later, the shadow sneaked back out from the hallway outside. A deliberately hushed childlike voice whispered into a phone. Hello? Is this the police? Honestly, my mom really is a kidnapper. All the proof is hiding inside her safe. You need to come arrest her right now. The whisper of her voice through the crack in our bedroom door was as sharp as a sliver of ice. Hello? Is this the police? Honestly, my mom really is a kidnapper. All the proof is hiding inside her safe. You need to come arrest her right now. Beside me, Chris's body went completely rigid. In the dim glow of the street lamp, filtering through our window, I could see his eyes, hollow, exhausted, and reflecting a profound, quiet horror. We lay there, suspended in the heavy silence of our bedroom, listening to the soft, barefoot patter of Brenda's feet as she sneaked back down the hallway to her own room. A few minutes later, the faint rustle of her bedsheets signaled she had climbed back into bed, likely sleeping with the serene, untroubled conscience of a child who believed she had just performed a heroic, righteous deed. She actually did it, Chris whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of an agonizing betrayal. She really called them. I didn't cry. The tears that had routinely stung my eyes over the past 7 years had finally dried up, leaving behind a cold, barren wasteland. I stared at the ceiling. She wants to destroy me, Chris. She doesn't just want to be right. She wants to watch me fall. What do we do? He asked, turning his head to look at me. When they get here, because they will come. We let them come, I said quietly. We open the door. We open the safe.
And we
let the truth do what it has always done. It took less than 20 minutes for the flashing red and blue lights to paint our living room walls in rhythmic, silent strokes. There were no sirens, but the heavy, authoritative rap on our front door shattered the silence of the night. Like a gunshot, Chris and I got out of bed, threw on our robes, and walked down the stairs. From the hallway upstairs, I caught the shadow of a small head peering through the banister. Brenda was awake, her silhouette practically vibrating with anticipation. She wanted to witness the handcuffs. She wanted to see the tears. I opened the door. Standing on the porch was the same detective from earlier, his expression a mixture of fatigue, professional skepticism, and deep gravity. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers, their hands resting lightly near their utility belts. Mrs. Vance? Mr. Vance, the detective said, his eyes scanning our faces.
I
Apologize for the late hour. We received an emergency call from this address.
A
Child reporting a kidnapping, specifying that evidence of the crime is locked in a home safe. Come in, detective, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the panic that had consumed me earlier that afternoon. As the officers stepped into the foyer, Brenda came sliding down the stairs.
She
had her frozen backpack slung over one shoulder, her face flushed with a terrifying, triumphant glow. She marched straight up to the detective, her big, round eyes wide with an imitation of civic duty. I found the proof, she chirped, pointing a small, accusatory finger at me. She told me she took me, and then she tried to lie and say she was joking.
But
Tonight, she admitted the paperwork is in the safe in her bedroom. I told you, I'm a good kid. I helped catch the bad guys. The detective looked down at Brenda, then up at me, his brow furrowing. Ma'am? The safe is upstairs, detective, I said, gesturing toward the staircase. Follow me. I will open it for you. Mom, Brenda squealed, her eyes darting between me and the officers, clearly frustrated by my lack of hysterics. You're going to jail. You shouldn't have stolen me. We walked up the stairs in a bizarre, silent procession, Chris and I leading the way, the detective and the two officers behind us, and Brenda trailing at the rear, her steps light and bouncy, as if she were walking down the aisle to receive an award. In our bedroom, I walked over to the closet, knelt down, and pulled back a basket of laundry to reveal the heavy gray safe. My fingers did not tremble as I entered the code. Click. Whir. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside lay a few family heirlooms, some emergency cash, and a thick, blue expanding folder. I reached in, pulled out the folder, and handed it directly to the detective. Everything you need is in here, I said. Brenda pushed her way to the front, straining on her tiptoes to watch. See? I told you. Arrest her. The detective opened the folder. He pulled out the first document, a certified adoption decree stamped by the state court, dated 6 years ago. Beneath it was a certificate of foreign adoption, heavily documented with seal after seal. And beneath those legal documents lay a police report from an international jurisdiction, detailed with grim, clinical descriptions. The detective read silently. The uniformed officers stood guard, their eyes darting around the room. The only sound was the rustle of paper. As the detective reached the third page, his eyes widened slightly. He looked down at the documents, then at Brenda, and finally at me. The suspicion in his eyes vanished, replaced by a profound, heavy sadness. What is it? Brenda asked, her voice losing a fraction of its smug confidence. Why aren't you putting the handcuffs on her? The detective slowly closed the folder. He looked at Brenda, his voice remarkably gentle, yet firm. Sweetheart, your mother didn't kidnap you. Yes, she did. Brenda stamped her foot, her face contorting into an ugly, petulant mask. She told me she did. And the papers. These papers, the detective interrupted, are legal adoption records. They show that 6 years ago, your mother and father went through a court of law to legally adopt you and make you their daughter. They didn't steal you. They saved you. Brenda froze. Her eyes darted to Chris, then to me, searching for the familiar look of wounded defeat. But she found nothing. My face was a mask of cold stone. No, Brenda muttered, her voice dropping. But she said she took me from human traffickers. She said my real parents. Your biological parents, the detective said, his voice tightening as he glanced at the details in the police report, were arrested for child abuse, neglect, and conspiracy to sell minors. If your parents hadn't gone through the immense legal and financial hurdle to rescue you from that custody battle and adopt you, you would have been placed in an abusive state institution overseas. Or worse. Your parents are heroes, young lady, not criminals. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Brenda's chest heaved. The grand, righteous victory she had meticulously planned had evaporated into thin air, leaving her standing in the center of the room, looking foolish, malicious, and incredibly small. You lied to me, Brenda whispered, turning her glare toward me. You let me call them. You knew this would happen. I didn't lie to you, Brenda, I said, my voice quiet and hollow. I told you the truth. You were rescued from traffickers. Your biological family was monstrous. But you chose to believe only the parts that you thought would allow you to destroy me. You wanted to see me in handcuffs because I wouldn't let you eat junk food. You wanted to ruin my life for a moment of spite. The detective handed the folder back to me. He looked at Brenda with a cold, disapproving gaze that no 7-year-old should ever have to earn from an officer of the law. We are leaving now, the detective said to us, his tone softening into one of deep sympathy. I am truly sorry for the disruption, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. And I am sorry you have to deal with this. Thank you, detective, Chris said, his voice dead. As the officers walked down the stairs, Brenda stood in the middle of our bedroom, her frozen backpack still slung over her shoulder. Her face was pale, her mind racing to find a way to twist the narrative, to regain her footing, to find a truth that would put her back on top. Well, she stammered, crossing her arms and squeezing her eyes into those familiar, crescent-shaped slits. You still kept it a secret from me. That means you're liars. A good kid like me shouldn't live with liars. I hate you anyway. I looked at Chris. He looked at me. In that shared gaze, a silent, irrevocable agreement was sealed. The cord was cut. Go to bed, Brenda, I said. I don't want to, she yelled. I'm going to tell my teacher tomorrow that you're bad parents. I'll tell everyone at school. Go to bed, Chris repeated, his voice dropping to a register so cold and commanding that even Brenda flinched. She turned on her heel and stomped down the hallway, slamming her door shut. In our room, Chris sat on the edge of the bed and buried his face in his hands. We can't do this anymore, Eleanor. We're raising a monster. She has no empathy, no conscience. She will destroy us, or she will destroy someone else, and she will smile while she does it. I walked over to the window, watching the police cruiser slowly pull away from our curb, its lights turned off. We gave her her final chance, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And she made her choice. Tomorrow we make ours. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Usually Brenda would be stomping around, demanding breakfast, or making snide remarks about my appearance or my cooking. But today, she remained in her room. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of me. Chris sat opposite me, laptop open, scrolling through a series of legal documents and contacts we hadn't touched in 6 years. When we adopted Brenda, the process had been incredibly complex due to her biological parents' criminal status. However, because of the extreme circumstances, the International Adoption Agency had retained a specialized clause. The parental rights of her biological parents had been terminated, but a distant maternal aunt, a woman named Clara Vance, no relation to us, coincidentally sharing a common surname root in her native country, had legally contested the adoption back then, seeking custody solely to claim the state-sponsored victim compensation fund allocated for Brenda. At the time, we fought tooth and nail, proving Clara's household was unfit, neglectful, and deeply unstable. Now, looking at the screen, we realized Clara was still alive, living in a dilapidated rural town 3 states away. She had periodically sent bitter, demanding letters to the adoption agency over the years, complaining about the stolen child who should have been her ticket to financial support. Are we really doing this? Chris whispered, his finger hovering over the trackpad. If we dissolve the adoption or transfer guardianship to Clara, Brenda's life will be miserable. Clara is a bitter, neglectful woman who only cares about money. It really is a fate worse than death for a child. Brenda doesn't want to be our daughter, I said, my voice steady. She told us that. She told the police that. She has spent her entire life weaponizing our love against us because she believed that love was a weakness she could exploit forever. She thinks she is invincible because she has our names on her birth certificate. I looked out the window. Without our love, Chris, what is she? She is a guest in our home who wishes us dead. If we keep her, she will eventually succeed in destroying this family. What happens when she is 15? When she makes a false allegation that actually sticks? When she ruins your career or sends me to prison for real? We cannot sacrifice our lives for a child who feels joy at the thought of us 6 feet under. Chris closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his cheek. He nodded. I'll call the attorney. By noon, the wheels were in motion. Because of the unique international legal structure of her adoption and our retained legal counsel, a temporary transfer of guardianship could be executed quickly, pending a formal dissolution. We contacted Clara's legal representative. Unsurprisingly, when offered a substantial monthly maintenance stipend from us to take Brenda off our hands, Clara eagerly agreed to sign the paperwork immediately. She didn't want Brenda. She wanted the money. And we were willing to pay whatever it took to buy our lives back. At 3 p.m., Brenda finally emerged from her room. She had realized we hadn't called her for breakfast or lunch. Her stomach was rumbling, and her smug, defiant attitude had returned, masked as hunger-induced irritability. I'm hungry, she demanded, slouching into a chair at the dining table. Why? Haven't you made me anything to eat? You're being bad parents again. I stood up, walked to the fridge, and pulled out a simple plate of leftovers. I set it down in front of her. Where's my frozen bag? She asked, looking around. I need it for school. Tomorrow. You won't be going to school tomorrow, Brenda, I said quietly. She paused, a forkful of food halfway to her mouth. She squinted at me.
Why?
a.m. I sick. I'm not sick. We're going on a trip, Chris said, entering the dining room. His face was entirely expressionless. He carried a large, black suitcase and set it down by the front door. We're going to visit your family. Brenda's eyes lit up with a sudden, malicious spark. My real family? The ones you stole me from? Are they going to take me away from you? Good. I hope they tell the police to lock you up. You should finish your food, I said, ignoring her taunt. It's a very long
Drive.
I don't care, she scoffed, shoving a piece of cold chicken into her mouth. I'm going to tell them everything. I'm going to tell them how mean you are and how you didn't let me eat candy and how you made me cry. They're going to hate you. I'm sure they will, I replied. For the rest of the afternoon, Brenda was in high spirits. She packed her own things, tossing her toys and clothes carelessly into her frozen backpack.
She
Laughed to herself, humming a little tune. She truly believed this was another game, a grand performance where she was the victimized princess finally being restored to her rightful kingdom. She had no concept of reality, only the fantasy of her own absolute righteousness. At 6 p.m., we loaded the suitcase into the trunk. Brenda climbed into the back seat, buckled herself in, and looked at me through the rearview mirror with a smug, knowing grin. Goodbye, house, she said dramatically. I'm never coming back to this ugly
place.
You're right, Brenda, I said, starting the engine. You aren't. The drive took nearly 9 hours. The smooth, tree-lined suburbs of our city gradually gave way to cracked highways, empty industrial fields, and finally, the dark, winding roads of a forgotten rural county deep in the neighboring
State.
As the hours ticked by, Brenda's excitement began to wane. The bright streetlights she was used to disappeared, replaced by pitch-black stretches of highway, where the only visible things were the reflective eyes of deer lurking in the brush. When are we getting there? She whined from the back, her voice losing its cheerful edge. It's dark. This road is bumpy. Soon, Chris said. He didn't turn around. He didn't offer her a tablet or a snack or a comforting word. The warm, accommodating parents who used to cater to her every whim had vanished. I want to watch a movie, she complained, kicking the back of my seat. Mom, give me your phone. No, I said. If you don't give me your phone, I'm going to tell my new family that you hit me, she threatened, her voice rising in a shrill screech. I'll tell them you didn't give me food for days. I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. The threat, which would have sent me into a panic a week ago, now felt like nothing more than the buzzing of a fly. Seeing that her threats were producing absolutely no reaction, Brenda fell
Silent.
a strange, uneasy tension began to settle in the backseat. She shifted, uncomfortably, clutching her frozen backpack tightly against her chest. Around 3 a.m., we finally pulled into a small, dilapidated town.
The air
Smelled of damp earth, rust, and coal dust. We drove past boarded-up storefronts, rusting pickup trucks parked on overgrown lawns, and flickering neon signs of dive bars. Eventually, the GPS guided us down a narrow, unpaved gravel road. Branches scraped against the sides of our SUV. At the end of the road sat a small, single-story house. The porch was sagging, supported by rotting wooden beams. Peeling paint hung from the siding like dead skin. A pile of rusted metal parts and old tires littered the front yard. A single, bare yellow light bulb hung from the porch ceiling, casting a sickly glow over the screen door. This was the home of Clara Vance. Chris parked the car. The silence that followed the engine shutting off was heavy and suffocating. Brenda stared out the window, her eyes wide. The smug, calculated smirk was completely gone from her face. In its place was a look of raw, unadulterated confusion. Where are we? She whispered, her voice trembling slightly. This house is
ugly.
It looks dirty. This is where your Aunt Clara lives, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. This is your new home. No, it's not, Brenda protested, her voice rising in panic. My real parents are rich. They have a big house. You said they were special. I never said they were rich, Brenda, I said, turning around to look at her.
I
said we rescued you from them. Your biological parents are in prison. This is your mother's sister. This is your family. I don't want to go in there, she cried, clinging to the seat. It smells bad. Outside. I want to go home. I want to go to my room. You don't have a room in our house anymore, Chris said. He got out of the car, walked to the trunk, and pulled out her suitcase. I opened my door and stepped into the cold night air. The gravel crunched under my boots. I walked to the back door, opened it, and looked at Brenda. "Get out, Brenda," I said. "No," she screamed, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. This time they weren't the calculated, manipulative tears she used to get her way. They were tears of genuine, terrifying realization. "You can't leave me here. You have to take care of me."
Dad.
Chris didn't look at her. He marched up the sagging porch steps and knocked on the screen door. A moment later, the inner door creaked open. A woman stepped out.
Clara Vance.
Was in her late 40s, but she looked much older. Her hair was dry and brittle, dyed a faded brassy blonde. She wore a stained sweatshirt and held a half-burned cigarette in one hand. Her eyes were sharp, greedy, and utterly devoid of warmth. She looked at Chris, then at the suitcase, and finally at Brenda, who was cowering in the back seat of her car. "That the kid?" Clara asked, her voice raspy and harsh. "Yes," Chris said. He handed her a manila envelope. "The first month's maintenance draft is in there. The rest will be deposited into your account on the first of every month as long as the guardianship remains active and she remains in your custody." Clara snatched the envelope, opened it, and counted the cash inside. A slow, yellowish grin spread across her face. "Well, look at that. Looks like the little princess finally came home." "I don't want to," Brenda shrieked, scrambling out of the car, trying to run past me toward the road. I caught her by the arm. Her skin felt hot, her tiny frame shaking with terror.
Mom.
"Mom, please," she begged, grabbing my coat. "I was joking. I'm sorry.
I
Won't tell the police anything. I'll tell them you're the prettiest mom. Promise. I'll take care of you when you get old. Please don't leave me." I looked down at her. I saw the desperate, tear-stained face of the child I had stayed up with for weeks when she had the flu. I saw the child I had shielded with my own body when we rescued her. But then I saw her eyes. Even now, beneath the panic, there was a desperate, calculating search for a vulnerability in me. She was looking for the soft spot, the guilt, the maternal instinct she had spent 7 years exploiting. My heart remained a block of ice. "Honestly, Brenda," I whispered, repeating her favorite words back to her, "I am just telling the truth. We don't want you anymore." I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my coat. Clara walked down the porch steps, her heavy boots thudding against the wood. She grabbed Brenda by the shoulder. Her grip was tight and unyielding. "Come on, brat," Clara grunted, dragging her toward the house. "You're going to help me clean the kitchen. And don't start crying, or I'll give you something to really cry about."
Mom.
"Dad," Brenda screamed, thrifting violently in Clara's grip. "I hate you. You're evil. You're kidnappers." Clara stopped, looking down at Brenda with a cold, mocking sneer. "Kidnappers? Kid, those two paid me to take you. Nobody wants you. Now, get inside." With a harsh shove, Clara pushed Brenda through the front door. The screen door slammed shut behind them, the rusty spring letting out a screeching wail. Chris and I turned around, walked back to our car, and got in. As we backed down the gravel driveway, I looked in the side mirror. Brenda was standing at the dirty front window, her face pressed against the glass, her hands smearing the grime as she wept. We drove away, leaving her in the dark. The first few months of our new life were strangely quiet. Chris and I returned to an empty house. We cleared out Brenda's room, donating her toys and furniture to a local shelter. We repainted the walls a soft, warm
Beige.
The heavy, suffocating tension that had hung over our home for years slowly evaporated, replaced by a quiet, peaceful solitude. We began to cook together again. We slept through the night, but we knew the story wasn't over. Every month, the legal representative we retained to monitor Brenda's status sent us a brief report, along with the confirmation of the financial transfer to Clara. The reports were grim, but entirely predictable. Brenda had tried her usual tactics at her new home. Within the first week, she had attempted to manipulate Clara by telling her truths. When Clara made a simple dinner of canned beans and stale bread, Brenda had turned up her nose and said, "Honestly, Aunt Clara, you are the worst cook in the world. This food looks like dog throw-up." In our house, such a comment would have resulted in me sighing, feeling hurt, and quietly making her something else just to keep the peace. But Clara was not me. According to the local social worker's report, which Clara bypassed by claiming Brenda stubbed her toe, Clara had simply snatched the plate away, locked Brenda in the dark utility closet, and let her go hungry for 24 hours.
When?
Brenda cried and screamed that she was going to call the police. Clara had laughed, took away Brenda's frozen backpack, and sold it to a secondhand shop for $5 to buy cigarettes. Without her backpack, without her toys, and without a mother who cared about her feelings, Brenda's honesty quickly became a liability. She tried to tell her new school teacher that Clara was a wasteful spender and a mean lady. But in that impoverished, rough rural school district, the teachers were overworked and underfunded. They saw a child clad in dirty, ill-fitting clothes making dramatic claims, and they simply filed a routine report that sat at the bottom of a stack of hundreds. Clara, finding out about the school report, punished Brenda by making her sleep on a thin mat on the kitchen floor. The absolute, insoluble bond of parental love that Brenda had relied on to protect her from the consequences of her cruelty did not exist with Clara. For the first time in her life, Brenda learned that the truth, when weaponized without the shield of someone else's unconditional love, was a double-edged sword that cut the wielder deepest. 6 months after we dropped her off, my phone rang. It was an unknown number from Brenda's area code. I paused, staring at the screen. I was sitting on our newly renovated porch.
Sipping tea.
The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over our manicured
lawn.
I answered the call. Hello. A shaky, ragged breath came through the receiver. Then a voice, small, raspy, and stripped of all its former arrogance. Mom? My grip on the phone tightened slightly, but my voice remained calm and even. Yes, Brenda. Mom, please, she sobbed. I could hear the background noise of a television, blaring a loud, trashy talk show, and the distant, harsh barking of a dog. Please come get me.
I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'll be a good kid. I promise. What's wrong, Brenda? I asked. Aunt Clara is mean. She wept, her voice cracking. She made me clean the toilet with my hands. She doesn't buy me clothes. The kids at school laugh at me because I smell like smoke. I don't have my frozen bag anymore. She sold it. I see, I said. I want to come home, she pleaded, her voice rising in a desperate, frantic crescendo. I want to sleep in my bed. I'll eat whatever you want. I won't ever say you're not pretty. You're the prettiest mom in the world, honestly. I swear. I'll tell everyone you're the best. I listened to her desperate flattery, her frantic attempts to find the words that would make me open my heart again. But all I could hear in my mind was the sound of her clapping and cheering when her father and I were heartbroken. I remembered her looking at me with those happy, crescent-shaped eyes and saying, she should just hurry up and be put 6 feet under. Brenda, I said softly. Yes? Yes, Mom? Are you coming to get me? Do you remember what you said to the detective? I asked. You told him you were a good kid who always tells the truth. And you told me that if I really did rescue you, you would still send me to prison because you had to tell the truth. I was lying, she screamed, her voice filled with panic. I was just trying to make you mad. I didn't mean it. But Brenda, I said, the truth is very important. And the truth is you didn't want to be my daughter. You told us that over and over again. You treated our love like a joke. You thought we would always be there to absorb your cruelty. Because we had to. Mom, I am not your mother anymore, Brenda. I said, my voice as clear and cold as a winter morning. Clara is your guardian. We paid her to take you, and we pay her to keep you. We chose to believe you when you said you didn't want to be our
daughter.
We simply gave you what you asked for.
No.
No, please. I hate it here. I hate Clara. I hate my real family.
She
shrieked, the raw terror in her voice echoing through the speaker. Goodbye, Brenda, I said. Honestly, I hope you learn to love the truth. I pressed the red button, ending the call. I set the phone down on the table. I took a deep breath of the cool, clean evening air. Beside me, Chris walked out onto the porch, carrying a plate of fresh fruit. He sat down, offering me a slice of apple. Who was that? He asked gently. No one, I said, taking the apple and smiling at him. Just a telemarketer. Chris smiled back, wrapping his arm around my shoulder. Let's go inside. It's getting cold. Yes, I agreed, standing up. Let's go home. Behind us, the house was warm, quiet, and completely filled with peace.